morning, everyone. I see Han also. She's joining. Thank you, Ananya, for your time today. I think banglanatak has already been introduced to the participants by various lecturers, and it has come into discussion and all that. So you are not a new face here. You have already been introduced as part of previous lectures. So I think that makes your yeah, it gives you a really nice context, and I think everybody is looking forward to it. So I welcome Ananya. Hi, good morning, Han. Good morning, everyone. So I would request Bharvi to start right away.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
So, as Professor Neil mentioned, Ananya Bhattacharya is a social entrepreneur and specializes in gender, culture, and sustainable development. She is an electrical engineer from Jadavpur University and a Commonwealth Scholar with Masters in Sustainable Development from Staffordshire University. She is also the co-founder and director of banglanatak.com, headquartered at Kolkata, and is working across India for inclusive and sustainable development using culture-based approaches since 2000. Ananya ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Bharvi, and thanks to CHM and ICCAP for inviting me to present and share my experience with you. Now, it's a pity that we're all online, but I'll request all of you to switch on the video for a second so that I know who you are. And please write in chat your countries so that I have some idea about, from where you're all coming. So we don't really have time to introduce each other, but please write in chat and turn on the video for a second so that I know who you are. So I'll share the presentation. So today my topic here is ICH inventorying and safeguarding. I know that this is a very detailed program through which you are learning about ICH, and a lot of things have been covered. So if there is any particular expectation you have out of my session, please write in chat and I'll try to address them in whatever time we have. What I propose to do today is cover, the basic foundational principles of safeguarding intangible cultural heritage. As you know, that UNESCO 2003 convention has really detailed this out in the convention and its operational directives. So I'll highlight some of the key points which we all must integrate in our practice when we work for safeguarding ICH. I'll share some of our experience of community-led inventorying and the tools we have used. And I'll have a broad discussion on what are the possible actions for safeguarding. So that's what I have to cover today. I'm planning to cover today. Safeguarding, as we know, the basic principle is that intangible cultural heritage is living, and it is being passed down through generations. It can be fairly contemporary also. It need not be like thousands of years old always, but it is something which shapes the community's identity, and the community, and it's very important that its value and meaning to the community is also transmitted, right? However, because it is living, it can change. So this is a very important point which we all must remember, that it is living heritage. Intangible cultural heritage, it's part of the identity. It is passed down through generations and it is living. I think this is the basic premise which defines all activities related to safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage. Now, sometimes there are traditions, which perhaps negate the principles of human rights, respects for environment, and mutual respect for people. So the 2003 convention is very clear on this, that traditions which do not conform to our principles of human rights, our respect for environment and mutual respect, it's a time to relook at them. So, heritage is not a cover for something which perhaps in the past had negated respect and rights include human, animal, environmental considerations and all that. So this is something which is very tricky and which creates lots of issues and challenges. For example, our indigenous communities, hunting is a way of life for them. But today hunting is banned. So what is done in Purulia, which is an indigenous community in the state where I live, called West Bengal, they have one day which is called the Shikar Utsav. So on the Shikar Utsav, they're allowed to hunt rabbits and, wild cocks and things like that. So, those are the kind of changes which perhaps in a modern day we have to look at. We know that there is this Jallikattu festival in Tamil Nadu, which was banned by Supreme Court. It is a bullock fight. We have also the Spanish bullock fight, and then animal lovers often question whether we should continue these rights. But the Jallikattu, the bullock rearers said that this is an activity where they show pride in how well they're raising their bullocks. So, there are various sides to stories, which we must be taking note of. There is no one right or one wrong. There is no question of something authentic and not authentic. It is something which has to be in tandem with the world today, with the principles we value today. And it is the communities who will decide that value, who will decide that meaning. And respect is a basic premise, basic corollary of all. I'll tell you a story. We have the same indigenous community who do the Hunters Festival. One of their favorite food is ant chutney. It's a sweet dish made with red ants. And a filmmaker who documented the food habits told that as they're very poor, they make this chutney with red ants and eat it. And when the community saw that, they protested. They said, come on, it's our delicacy. We don't eat ants because we are poor. So, this is how, we need to be very aware and very conscious when we are documenting. And that's why it's very important that there is community participation, and community is in the driver's seat when we are doing inventory. So, apart from participation, another important thing which we must be aware of is the consent of the communities concerned. What would happen maybe 20 years back or even 15 years back? People had always done research, people had always documented heritage traditions, but these considerations were not always integrated in their approach. As a result, when the outputs or the outcomes were shared and when the community came across it, around the world you will find cases of where the community protested. So it's very important that community is actively participating in the documentation. They decide what is documented. They decide how the interpretation is done. So here you see in the deserts of Rajasthan, documentation is going on the folk music traditions, the desert music traditions of Langa music, which is a music tradition there. So it is one of the Langa gurus who is doing the oral interview and sharing about the tradition. About collaboration, this is an example where, various Baul musicians are coming together and they're performing and sharing about their tradition. So these basic principles of participation has to be honored very much. The next important thing is that communities will play the main role. Often, when people drew up inventory plan, it's good that, we as a community of heritage professionals, we have come forward and we have corrected the mistakes in the past. But the previous approach used to be that people used to do desk research, understand the art form, go to the community, document the art form and create their films and books and all that. But more and more, the approach which is being promoted and practiced nowadays is getting the community talk about their art form, record their art form, and share about their art form. So they are the ones who will be inventorying, who will be safeguarding. The UNESCO 2003 convention website has excellent material, and I'll advise all of you to look up. All you need to do is to register and you'll get access to all that material, which details all the various approaches and practices related to participatory inventory. So as Neil was sharing, you have heard of some of the traditions we work with. This is the Patachitra tradition, the scroll painting tradition. And Bahadur Chitrakar, who is sitting here, he is sharing about his collections. You know, he's a collector and he has his own private museum where he has hundreds of years old of artifacts from all across the world, because he has been traveling, attending programs and attending exhibitions, and he has acquired that. So here is his son-in-law recording him, and he's sharing about his collections. In the inset, you find, you know, two ladies from the same village who have mapped some of the resources and sharing about them. The other important thing where, you know, there has been a lot of gap in the past and things are improving very much is the access. Communities should have continued access to the instruments, objects, artifacts, cultural and natural spaces, places of memories, you know, which they need for expressing their intangible cultural heritage. When we started our work for safeguarding intangible cultural heritage in 2003-04. And when we were in Punjab, I think this is around 10-12 years back. And what we found, we were doing participatory inventory of the intangible cultural heritage of Punjab. And we found many of the musicians were very reluctant to share. They say that people come and record and they get the benefit out of it. Why should I share? What is the benefit I am getting? I never get a copy of the recordings. The same is with the desert musicians of Rajasthan. These are very famous music traditions which have been further popularized by Bollywood music. But unfortunately, though a lot of recordings are there, though there are archives of their music, the communities do not have access to them. So it's very important that when we are doing inventorying, when we are doing documentation, of course, these are very extremely important for safeguarding ICH, but access of the community to these documentations is very important. If there are precious collections in a museum, the community must have access to go and see and learn from them again. So I'll discuss some of the ways in which this can be done, but this is extremely important. Another extremely important aspect is the right to secrecy and privacy. Here you see the Kalbelia dance, which is inscribed in the UNESCO representative list of heritage of humanity. Originally, the Kalbelias were the snake charmers of the desert. They were nomads. And they used to play the bin. You see here Kalunath Kalbelia playing the bin, which is an instrument, musical instrument, wind instrument. Now, what happened with time? Snake games with snakes were banned, right? Snake charmers could not carry on out that profession anymore. So what they started is the women in their communities, they used to do the snake dance. So this Kalbelia dance is a more later heritage, a tribute of this tradition. And then Kalbelia dance is now extremely popular, where women do dance like the snake. Now the Kalbelias, being nomads, they have excellent knowledge of nature and traditional medicines. So Kalunath once told me that, you know, no one in our community wears spectacles because we know how to take care of our eyes. So though here he is wearing spectacles, he is now quite old, but you know, the knowledge they have of nature, they are not willing to share it outside their community, and that needs to be respected. So where that knowledge needs to be documented. But again, the public access to the knowledge needs to be constrained if the community does not want to share. The other performance you were seeing is the Baul performance. Baul is also inscribed in the UNESCO representative list of heritage of humanity. It's a shared tradition of Bangladesh and West Bengal in India. And this tradition started sometime in the 15th century, 16th century, when, people who are followers of Hinduism and followers of Islam, this group, the Baul and Fakirs, they came forward and they said at that point that, religion or God, religious boundaries should not be there. God is within ourselves. And through our love for humanity, we can only attain the divine. So Baul philosophy is a way of life for them. And they have various philosophical principles which they practice, to attain what they say, to follow the path of their leader or murshid or guru. Now, these paths, these philosophies are something they pass down from the guru to the disciple. And they do not want anyone who is not following the Baul way of life to know about them. There has been cases where researchers have worked with them. They have documented these philosophies and have published books. When Bauls came to know of that, they were not happy because that is something they do not want everyone to read. So these are some of the finer nuances which we must need to be conscious of. I'm losing my next button. The next very important principle is the recognition and the fair benefits. Now, this is something which, at least in the South Asian context, it's a huge challenge, that we have our books and films and very varied kind of documentations on our art and craft and intangible cultural heritage. And because, we are so used to the richness of the heritage in which we live, we do not think it is necessary to attribute the tradition bearers. So you'll hardly see the name of the artist mentioned, name of the craft maker mentioned, name of the village mentioned, name of even the art form mentioned. You'll find beautiful calendars and diaries on visual art traditions of India, but you won't find the names of the traditions or the names of the painters. Now, this is something we must correct. Communities must be recognized and attributed appropriately. Also, these should not be used outside the context. If it is commodified for commercialization, then it should not be misrepresented. The other aspect is whether they are getting benefit, moral and material interest resulting from the heritage, whether they are getting the benefit, whether they're able to share fairly the benefits of safeguarding, practicing, and transmitting. This is extremely important as we discuss how we inventory and safeguard our ICH. So those are the foundational principles which are actually written in the convention, right? So, of course, the basic thing we find that whenever we are planning a project to inventory ICH, community participation is the pivot. They need to be at the center, they need to be leading the discourse, they need to benefit from the intervention, they need to give consent for the intervention. So whenever any of you are planning a project, the first step is to build trust with the community, make them aware of your purpose, understand what they would like to achieve out of it. Now, in many communities, we have the challenge that our communities are not formally educated, are not literate. I don't want to call them illiterate. The Bauls, they are not literate, but they sing 700 songs talking of crossing religious creed to attain the divine. So they are educated, but it's a pity that we have all adhered to the westernized models of education, thanks to colonization. So we have lost our traditional ways of education, which are still there in these communities, whom we call subaltern communities, and we don't value the education and knowledge they have. But they, if you make them sign a consent form, for example, they don't understand what is written. So it is very important to build their trust, to make them understand what you are doing, and have that verbal communication instead of signing a written document only. And as I was saying, that we need to understand what is their need, what they need out of the inventorying process. So these are extremely important. Another very good thing which we found methodology wise, see, as we say that it is not a tree but an orchard, right? So when we go out to a community, it is not only one ICH element but several, and they have their interactions or they may not have their interactions. And what has happened that because of marginalization, because of isolation, because of dwindling number of heritage practitioners, the traditional way of exchange and learning from each other, those avenues have been stopped. As a result, often these communities, they do not know about each other's heritage, each other's ICH, even though they might be physically living in the same state or adjoining districts or adjoining villages. So it's very important to bring them all together, as then also, the flow of discussion, the flow of ideas gives them new understanding, enables them to identify their needs and also safeguarding strategies. So, building links between the communities, having exchanges between the communities is very important. We who are academics, who are researchers, who are NGOs working as facilitators, we are all facilitators, and our role should not be becoming the voice of the community. Our role should be enabling the voice of the community, and that is the principle with which we should do inventorying and safeguarding. So mapping and inventorying is extremely important. Why? There are multiple reasons. Of course, one, to protect the ICH, to develop understanding on the ICH, to identify the attributes of the heritage element, because we need to know what it is. In all across the world, for thousands and thousands of ICH elements, it's a ground reality that we may be having only a handful of practitioners, maybe 10, maybe 5, maybe even less. And these living heritages, average age is maybe above 50. That is what we find. We have worked across India, and I've also visited several South Asian countries as part of research projects. And whenever I meet the living heritage, the average age is above 50. And one common challenge is the young people are not pursuing it. So we need to document that knowledge, that skill, right? So that is, of course, one of the primary reasons. The next is how we can establish the viability, how we can develop strategies for sustainability. For that, we need to do the inventory. As I was sharing, we need to build the relationships for safeguarding, because these communities have become isolated. They do not have access to the documentations they could have used. They do not have access to the collections they could have used. So, mapping and inventorying process should build new networks, new linkages. Of course, it needs to increase the awareness on the art form. That's why we have all the products, all the outputs which come from inventorying exercises. And as the communities participate, as they go through the process, it reinforces their sense of identity. It creates interest and enthusiasm among young people. Today, today we are very lucky that we have this small device in our hand called mobile phone, which is so versatile. So we don't need to carry recorders, we don't need to carry videos. We can use this small device for so many things. And young people in villages, in towns, everywhere, for them, it's very easy to use. So, it is very good as a strategy to engage young people in the community, to record, to make them conduct the interviews, to do the recordings of the processes, as that way they also gain interest, which is also a strategy for mobilizing and engaging young people, other than reinforcing the sense of identity. Now, in the next few slides, I'll explain how we do this knowledge, attitude, practice, study, because mapping and inventorying exercise should not be just, recording or listing the heritage attributes, but we need to understand what is the level of knowledge, what is the skill repertoire, who has the skills, which skills are endangered, what is the attitude of the community, do they want to continue? If they do not, why they don't want to continue? What is the attitude of young people? What are the living heritages thinking? And what are they doing? What is the practice, to continue to showcase, to build audience? So we need to identify all this as part of our inventorying exercise. So here you see, two women, they're writing down about their ICH, and a young person interviewing one of the craftspersons. So some photos just to give ideas. Now, what are the participatory inventorying tools? Now, one excellent tool is oral interview, because if you have a kind of and a storytelling approach, use a storytelling approach, because what we have found that if you have a list of questions, of course, if they're close, then it's a dead effort, because people will answer yes and no, that kind of thing. It's what is must is open questions and maybe a semi-structured interview, but encourage storytelling. And there are excellent interviewing guides you'll find in the Smithsonian Folklife website, which shares various approaches of oral interviewing. So what we do is we train the young people in the communities in talking to their elders who are still practicing, the traditional practitioners, and talk about how the art form has evolved. Now this has several components. One could be at the family level, how he learned, what did his father do or mother do, how it was practiced, where did they go, what are the events they remember. And then also at the community level, what is the meaning and value it holds for the community? There will be questions beyond the family, right? So ask questions which encourage them to tell the story of the tradition. One tool we use very effectively is to tell them about, how was a tradition 5 years back? What was done 10 years back? What was done 15 years back? And what they envisage will happen after 5 years, after 10 years. What is needed to keep it viable, So that kind of, diagrammatic approach is excellent. Mapping is extremely useful, and it could be as simple as, drawing on the ground, with a stick or on a piece of chart paper. And what we do is, one is mapping the resources, what they need, for continuing their tradition, what resources are available, who are the stakeholders. We often use diagrams where we ask them to, draw lines to the various stakeholders in their network, and the thickness of the line depicts, the frequency of interaction or the importance of interaction. Now, another important part of stakeholder is, it helps you to map the associated communities. For example, we have a masked dance tradition called the Chow Dance, which is also in the UNESCO representative list of Heritage of Humanity. Now, in the Chow Dance, you have the Chow mask makers who are a different community living in another village. You have the big percussion drums, which are met by another community living in a separate village. So, when you are documenting and inventorying Chow, that inventory needs to map the other related ICH forms. As I said, it's an orchard and it's not a tree. Another very useful tool is the seasonality mapping. In seasonality mapping exercise, I wish we were in face-to-face so that we could have done some exercise on a chart paper, but I hope this gives you some idea. So in seasonality, what we try to find out is what is the practice throughout the year. Like some of the dance and song traditions, they are associated with festivals, and usually they are performed during that time. And then you ask that how do you nurture the skill rest of the year? What is done that time? In case of crafts, there are certain seasons when they are going to various festivals and exhibitions. And there are other seasons when it might be raining too much, for example, to do pottery. So there might be off periods. They have, also rituals, like there's certain months when they do not touch the potter's wheel. You need to understand all these finer nuances as you are mapping and inventorying. So this is an example where we did an exercise where we are working right now with the communities to develop the villages as cultural tourism destinations. So the communities are writing down what all are the possible places where visitors to the village can also cover. And we did this exercise for the first time in Purulia, the district which I said was extremely rich in indigenous communities, and UNESCO supported publication of this as part of their Heritage Passport program, where 1 day, 2 day, 3 day possible itineraries, if a person is visiting that area, the community sat and drew. And I'm talking of a time which was 12 years from now, 12 years before, to around 2008, 9, 10, that time, when Purulia is one of the poorest districts and no one ever thought of going to Purulia. Today, it is one of the prime weekend destinations, and people from Jharkhand, from Bengal, they all go to Purulia because it has fascinating landscape, it has built heritage, and it has all these indigenous communities with their art and craft. So often, you don't know what you don't know, right? And inventorying and mapping helps us to reduce that gap of not knowing the resource, the wonderful cultural resource which is there embedded in the communities. Mapping and inventorying is also an excellent strategy or excellent approach for revival of skills. We have a tradition called Katha Embroidery, which is a very simple tradition of layering old clothes and stitching them together with run stitch, to make throws and quilts. And what women used to do since generations, they used to, as they did the run stitch, it used to be called the vocabulary of women of Bengal. They used to, draw flowers. They used to make embroideries showing flowers and village life and rural life, and even their museum collections which show how the British captured India and how India did its freedom movement. So all kinds of stories are depicted in Katha. And this, as you see here in these small inserts, it's a simple run stitch, and it is done in different ways. It's just a run stitch, but you see, each becomes a different pattern, and it's a mix of patterns. Now, what happens sometimes, maybe in the 70s, 80s, this quilting tradition is now not practiced so much anymore. It is still there. It is still very much alive, but not the way it was before. Maybe many women, they do it as a way of living, and you will find Katha embroidered products everywhere, but the quilting tradition was lost. And all these finer nuances of run stitch were lost. So this is also around 10, 12 years back, when we sat with the women, we went through their own collections of Katha made by their mothers and grandmothers. We asked them to identify all these patterns, and we encouraged them to recreate what is known as Sujni. It's they're also in Bihar, Jharkhand. It's called the Sujni, which is a very beautifully embroidered layers of old clothes together. And they're now today very expensive, but they're again now in the market. They cost around 7,000, 10,000, 12,000 rupees. And there was a time when, because of lack of demand, it was gone. Only, they used to make for their own daughter's wedding to show, but it was not available in the market. But today, Shujni is very much back in the market. So what happened? That mapping exercise, that inventorying exercise led to, again, revitalization of the practice. The Patachitra is a storytelling tradition, and the artists paint stories in long scrolls and sing them. So when we started inventorying of this art form, there were only 10 persons, who painted, and there were only 2 persons who knew the songs. And today, if any one of you go to the village, it's a very vibrant village today. It's one of a very popular cultural destinations called Naya. You will find 80 families, all of them practicing Patachitra as a livelihood. And when this documentation work was going on, I think that was 2008 and 9, we actually sat with those 5-6 people and tried to, document how these colors are made. And we encourage them, to again restart and practice that tradition. And today they have both kinds of Patachitra where they're using modern colors as well as these traditional colors. And they take immense pride, in use of natural color. So inventorying led to revival of this lost technique. So at this point, I'll just take a pause and ask you whether you have any questions. Otherwise,
Hello, Ananya.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I am Swasti from Nepal. I was just curious whether you would also tell us the process of inventorying the ICH.
Yes, so this is the process which I'm saying. First, is the mobilizing and building trust of the community. And of course, you will have to do the background research and you will have to know about the art form yourself. Then you go out to the community. And what I said is have a structured plan where you want to know about the knowledge, the attitude, and the practices. Right? And in that structured plan, then you have to delineate. So knowledge is the skill set. What are the skills? And what are the attributes of the heritage? I'll do some more tools for that. So there are lots of tools. Huh? So you have to identify what are the attributes, what is the goal for inventorying. We need to understand the ICH. We need to know what are the attributes. We need to know the meaning and the value the community has for the ICH. And we need to know the skill which is needed to continue that. And then at the end of it, we need to understand how that viability and sustainability can be maintained. So what I've shared so far is that after the basic secondary research, you go out to the community, mobilize the community, get their consent, make them aware of what you want to know and what they want to know, what they want to document. That is very important. Have them as the key person and devise a kind of questionnaire. Now, I don't want to give a sample questionnaire to you because that will change from the nature of the ICH. But what you can remember is knowledge, attitude, and practice, and heritage attribute and skill level. This is what you need to cover in your inventory. And the questions when you ask, again, I'll encourage you not to ask yourself, but get the young people in the community to ask them, have kind of discussions, because often we find that, when we do these discussions, people say, we don't talk about our heritage. This is the first time we are perhaps talking among each other. So these are really ways you can open up people in talking and having the dialogue. So inventorying is not really, I would say, a research study, but inventorying is a lot to do with the community participation and getting community knowledge exercise. I think that is the crux.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other question? Let me see the chat. Okay. One of you has a question that about the role of language and how language transforms over time. Now, for the convention, I did not do, the different forms of ICH because I'm assuming that has been already covered. But the convention says oral traditions, performing traditions, and ritual traditions, rituals, practices, knowledge of nature and universe, then traditional sports, traditional craftsmanship. There's these 5-6 forms. They do not list language as ICH because language is the vehicle of ICH. We are singing and doing drama using language. So, but definitely in today's world, when we lose, I think, a language every 20 minutes or half an hour, I think one language is dying. So it's very important that we come forward to document the language. So I've been talking of Purulia, which is a district where the people belong to indigenous communities, and the languages they speak are oral languages. They do not have any written script. And it's very interesting, in those languages, they do not have any future tense because they live in the present. They do not have future tense. So what we have encouraged is to document the songs in their language. We have encouraged them to talk about their art form in their language and document that. So these are the ways we have integrated the language aspect. Raj, you have a question?
Yes, ma'am. Hello. I'm Raj Suwal from Nepal. My basic concern on making inventory of ICS is preservation of its originality and preservation of ICS as such. There is a one cause why we are need to making inventory is to preserve for the next generation. That is the one cause. But when we are involving in inventorying this ICS, what I am feeling is we are using the language that is different. I think we are not using a local language. We probably using the regional language, national language, or might be international language. So that is the one issue that I am very much afraid, actually, because when we are not making inventory of ICS by their own language and not keeping their own culture, their own ICS with them, making inventory of ICS by foreign language of that given community is by the in, I think this is making available those knowledges, those creativities, those intangible cultural heritage to the foreign community, I think, rather than the local community. So this is the very challenging issue for me, because I used to talk about IPR and ICS issues, because in one side, this is challenge to make it available for the next generation for the same community. And that is the major challenge, I think. That is the major objective of the ICS convention also. But when we are talking about the link of or the relation of the ICS convention with the other convention or other international tools of human rights and other international legal tools and other several mechanism, and specifically when we come to the this inventory process, I think there is a provision in our documentation mechanism in ICS instrumentation also, that it has to be made by the local language, their own language, and it has to kept with themselves. We should not take that particular inventory with our own central library or somewhere else in our computer or somewhere else. That is the very serious issue, because when we are making inventory nowadays, some of the NGOs, INGOs, and local government, or maybe some educational institutions, they are making the inventory. They are supporting in making inventory. But in that process, what is happening is the actual record of the ICS is not kept with the local community, but it has been kept to the out of community. So at that time, there is a lot of chances to misappropriating ICS.
That's why, I covered the foundation principles and I pointed out these problems. These problems are there. The problem of access, the problem of consent, and language, as I explained. We have something wonderful today called subtitle. So encourage and ensure the community speaks in their own language, shares in their own language, and we have subtitle for international and national audience to read that. So I answer the same when you ask the question that, when we are documenting indigenous traditions, we let the indigenous communities share in their own language and we engage them to get the translation. That is the change in approach which we must bring about, which was not done 10 years before or even 5 years before. But answering your other question of, access. If I can keep it in my computer with their consent, but they need to have access. If I make an archive of folk music, the folk musicians need to have an access. And that access does not mean they have to fly 1,000 kilometers, but they need to have something which they can easily access in their own community. So these are the foundational principles which we must integrate in our work. Now,
my concept and my very concern is that ICS data, ICS record has to be owned by the local community rather than kept by some organization and people, because this is the property of the community. So that is the
absolutely, and absolutely. That's why we take the they have a version. I'll share more examples to give you ideas on how we do it. And see, as a nation, as a state party, the government has to have inventory, right? So it cannot be that government does not have. The government will have a version, the community will also have access and will have their own version. So, I mean, we'll have access. That is the main thing. And technology is enabling today. So technology makes it possible to access. We need to ensure that communities overcome the digital divide. I have another interesting question here that I see may have, I'll answer your questions when I go through the rest of my presentation.
Sure.
Another question we have is on, if ICH has multiple subheadings, it has multiple sub-elements, we have to document everything. Nothing has to be omitted. Like the Chow Dance. There is a Purulia dance, there is a Mayurbhanj Chow, there is a Saraikela Chow. So each has to be documented by the community that practices. And of course, there has to be a standardized format, because if we do a say website, I need to know the boxes I have to fill up. So there has to be, that's why, you know, when we identify, but we need to mention, make the format very flexible. Like instead of saying, instead of making 4 fields for 4 attributes, let's open up and give the community option to enter as many attributes, as many subheadings as they want to. So have flexible formats.
Ma'am, actually, if we want to like communicate with community, how should we go with, like, how we can talk about this topic? Like, okay, we will document it. If they are not so much convinced or they're not aware about how important it is,
you will have to go and build rapport. You have to go several times. You'll have to talk with the leaders of the community. You'll have to talk with the tradition bearers. So that's why it's very important when you do the background research, you understand like who are the holders of this ICH, and you'll have to talk to them, understand their needs and make your plan as per their needs. That's when they will open up and welcome the documentation. I think my session is like for half an hour more or 40 minutes more. So let me cover some more points and I'll come back for a discussion. A mechanism for consent. See, the European approach is to get a signature. But we know that in our South Asian context, getting a signature has no meaning because, you know, communities can't read, right? So many people can't read. So what's the point in making them sign? So what we do oral recording of, you know, where we explain what we are going to do and where they agree. We keep that record. So I'll now explain one tool we use to map heritage attributes. So Patachitra, as I had shared, are long scrolls, as you see here, where, you know, the storytellers, they paint the stories and sing them. Now, these scrolls are very expensive, right? They take months to paint. They're painted with natural colors, which takes time to make. So they are very expensive. So naturally, you know, for viability, what the painters are doing now is they are painting the stories on t-shirts, on saris, on wood, on leather, and they're painting those, they're selling those utility products, which give them income. So what the exercise we do with the communities, we use the roots and fruits tool, where we sit with the community and we ask them to understand, to tell us what are the various heritage products and services they offer. It could be crafts, it could be traditional knowledge of medicine, it could be performing traditions. So what are the roots of the tradition? What are the traditional skills, knowledge, material, know-how, process, meaning, and value they have for the communities? And what are the fruits? Fruits are the products and services which are linked to the tradition. Some are closer to the roots of the tradition and some are further from it. And of course, all fruits need not be for sale, right? You need not commercialize everything, but there might be something which might be suitable for commercialization. So as I was sharing about the Chow Dance, it has a very ornate mask. This dance came to this part, they say, from Tibet. So it has an ornate mask and it's a very acrobatic dance. But the mask makers, now a Chow mask is huge and it's very expensive. But the mask makers, they live near a hill, which is a popular destination. And over the years, the village has become a tourist destination. Whoever is spending the weekend in the hills makes a trip to this village. So the mask makers are innovating different masks. And for example, here you see a mask where the mask maker is actually portraying Mother Earth, right? So it's a fruit of a tradition, very different from the root, but it is helping them to remain viable. So in the exercise, what we do, we actually ask them to list all the core characteristics of their heritage. And often community members do not explicitly do this discussion. They never talk about it because it's something so much ingrained in their way of life. They perhaps do not reflect. But it is very important to sit with them when we are doing the inventory and make them identify the key attributes. For example, when we worked with the Patachitra painters, they said it's not only the painting, but the theme of the painting and the gun or the song, the performance with the scrolls, the way, how the song is composed, the way they paint, the way they use the natural color, the way they make the natural color, all these are their attributes. So this is where the community is speaking in the local language, and we as the documenters will be documenting. So it is not that as researchers, we are going to analyze and list the heritage attributes, but we will let the community talk about it. Next is the fruits. So the members may say that, okay, we do the painting and traditionally we painted the stories of gods and goddesses. But today we have painted on tsunami, we have painted on 9/11, we have painted on the recent cyclone, even on COVID. One scroll painting on COVID, the painter painted it because, she was at home, she could not go anywhere. So she did this new scroll on COVID pandemic. And moment she posted the video, it went viral and drew around 1 million viewers. So, that is a part of technology also, which we need to utilize. So this is a new fruit of the storytelling tradition where the painters are telling contemporary stories, and they talk today about women's rights, about stopping violence against women and children, about sending children to school, about stopping deforestation, about stopping use of plastics. So we'll find scrolls on all these topics. So these are all the new fruits along with the various painted products. They also do murals, they do lots of new things. So this is the exercise where you sit with the painter. Now you were talking about originality, Raj. Now originality is something which the community decides. A painting on the story of from epic like Ramayana and a painting on the story of COVID. Now, won't you call the painting on COVID as authentic? It is being done by the painter using the same tradition, using the same process. She is doing a song using the way she composes lyrics. So it is equally authentic. So when we are talking of ICH, we are not talking of preserving, we are talking of safeguarding. Preserving means keeping a thing in the same state. While, as I said right in the beginning, that in case of safeguarding, we need to recognize it's a living heritage. So that is something which is extremely important. And, in this exercise, often, people also discuss about products and services which might be in demand, which are not currently offered. So it also, helps them to brainstorm new ideas. Now, along with identification of the fruits, so along with the roots of the tradition and along with the identification of fruits, What we also do is to make the community list, like how this skill, what is the skill involved? So say, for example, making scrolls out of paper pasted onto sari. How is this skill practiced? How do they recycle? This is also a nice way of recycling things. How do they make the natural painting colors? Who has the skills? How do they compose the new songs? Who has the ability to compose new lyrics? So it is about the skill repertoire. Now I'll talk about the 4 main components of safeguarding. So if we have to safeguard ICH, what we need to safeguard? We need to safeguard the skill repertoire. So we need to know what are the heritage attributes, who has the skills, and how many people have the skills. Like, as I said, when we started documenting Patachitra, there were only 2 persons who knew the songs. And by the time I think within 2-3 months of the project, one of them died. So there was just 1 person left who knew the song. So we gave priority to this person teaching others the songs. So it helps you also in prioritization when you map the skill base which is present. Then when you're talking about the challenges, often you also ask the community, like, what are the challenges? And sometimes there might be a new need of bringing in something new. For example, there is a tradition called Dokra, which is a very ancient tradition which was practiced all across the world 4,000 years back, called the lost wax method of metal casting, where they make molds using wax and resin, and they put metal chips and put that whole thing in furnace, and it takes shape. I'll show you the Dokra. I have the picture right in the beginning. So this is the metal casting, and here you see he's making this mold with the resin and wax, and then they will put in the chips, put it in the furnace, and the resin and wax melts away, and this beautiful product comes out. It's a very ancient nomadic tradition. Now, when we did this mapping, we found that they use old furnaces, which are quite dangerous. So, when you're mapping heritage, even the safety aspect of it, the impact on health aspect of it needs to be documented. And we realized most of these people had burns in their hand and feet, and they were, very alcoholic because, they walking in that heat, they used to consume alcohol a lot, and it was very pathetic, extremely pathetic. So, what we worked on is we worked with scientists who work on making, suitable furnaces, and we gave them new modern furnaces. So, the process of furnace changed, but the basic thing was preserved. And now, they don't have this health hazard anymore in this practice. You see, so when there is a very interesting exercise, which maybe you can look up, by Joseph Lowe from Smithsonian. He does as an authenticity exercise. So he talks to the community about which elements do you think will affect authenticity if it is disturbed. And most people, what they agree upon is that it is the process which is important, it is the know-how which is important, but the output is not a sign of authenticity. I can make anything, any new thing, using the skill I had, using the knowledge I had, and using that same process. So that is what I found out, answering the questions which some of you asked, that how we preserve authenticity, work with the community and say, what thing you think we should not lose? We should not lose, so that, it does not lose its meaning and value. Like the Patuas, they said that, we are losing our song because people are buying the kettle, where they are the painted sari, the painted stole, the song, then it's gone. So how can we, ensure that our song is retained, because that's what we valued. So what we did is, we documented their songs, we created a website, and nowadays when the Patuas, they sell something, they will give the URL of that website where the song is there, or they even put QR codes on the tags so that people can just use their mobile and go to the website and listen to the song. What happened as a result of this use of technology is, when we started this mapping, the Patua said, you know what has happened? The young boys, they're not learning the songs anymore. But our songs are so important. But the boys, you know, they feel that, you know, they don't want to sing anymore because in that traditional way. But now with this use of technology and with the popularity of the songs and linking of the songs with the painted products, what has happened? And in COVID, as we know, one positive part of COVID was, you know, the digital divide was bridged in many ways. So people demand the songs, and young boys in the village are now learning songs, learning singing, because they realize that they need to know the songs to sell their paintings. So that has been a very wonderful outcome. So heritage skills repertoire is extremely important. So when we're doing inventorying, we do the mapping and we work with the community to understand what are the challenges, which skills are getting lost, and how they can be safeguarded. That also needs to be part of our inventorying exercise. One thing we have realized that inventorying process itself, if we can make communities participate effectively, it itself is a skill development process. As you see here, there are these folk musicians who are recording songs. And this was the first time ever they went to a studio to record. Or here you find them, you know, they're documenting the process and they're sharing the process, explaining the process in their own language. So it gave them new communication skills, which they did not have before. They had never shared about their art form, and that is very important skill, you know, other than the practice, the performance, the making. The ability to communicate about your heritage is a very key parameter for safeguarding, and proper community participation in inventorying builds knowledge and skills. So that kind of covers, you know, the various things to be done for inventorying. Now I'll go over to the second part of my discussion today, is what are the safeguarding actions. We have covered the most important one, the inventorying and documentation, and then how we can take out. So as I said, what are the key components of safeguarding? First is, of course, the skill repertoire and the transmission of skills. So the moment I'm talking of transmission of skills or heritage education, there are various kinds. One is transmission in the community. And the other is building awareness on the heritage among the wider community at national, international, regional level. Because for ICH to survive, for ICH to sustain, it needs to have the second important thing, which is reputation. People need to be aware of it. So heritage education is extremely important. And you know, the tools we create out of safeguarding, they are very important for contributing to heritage education. So as I was sharing, COVID helped us to innovate, and nowadays all these artists, as you see here, you know, the inset, the Patachitra artists, they're taking a class with children in Chicago, you know, diaspora in Chicago, who would have otherwise never learned about Patachitra. And you know, this class has gone for 3 months now. And they want 3 more months because they want to learn more and more about the mythology, the stories, and the painting traditions. We also did graphic novels, which children loved a lot. We regularly go to schools with where the artists, by we I mean the artists, the communities, they go to the schools and they share and they teach. So these are extremely important steps to engage young people and build reputation. For strengthening skill transmission, you know, it's very important to engage the gurus, the masters, the living heritages. So here are some photos from Rajasthan where, you know, the Manganiar musician is teaching the boys and the Baul guru training their artist. Because what has happened? Why is ICH threatened? The traditional ways of transmission, the traditional modes of learning are no longer there. The rituals are no longer done, the festivals are no longer performed, the cultural spaces are gone, the traditional patronage of royalty, of landlords is gone, and we are not going to recreate that world, right? As humanity will change. But we need to find new ways of strengthening the ecosystem where people learn from the masters. We have the master-disciple tradition, the Guru Shishya Parampara, which can be recreated, and that skill transmission does not only involve the song, the dance, or the making, but also the history and philosophy and building skills to understand the audience and performing and practicing and showcasing or producing as per various market segments and audience segments. So again, here technology plays a very important role. Here you see a CD inside. This is a lifestyle song in the foothills of Himalayas. And you know, people sing these songs as they row the boat, as they drive the bullock cart, and then you know, people also ride elephants as they ride elephants for taking logs and all that. So these songs are talking about elephants, about bullocks, about rivers, about nature, and it's very much part of their life. And everyone knew the songs, and at one point, people had stopped learning, stopped practicing. But now again, there are several schools where all the masters, they came together as part of the inventorying exercise. They documented what all needs to be transmitted. They created CDs, and these CDs were distributed. So one of you were asking about access. So this is how you give the access. You create CDs, you create pen drives, you distribute among the community, audio recordings, video recordings, films, photographs, publications. So whatever is there in your national inventory, ensure the community has it in their own way, that is, they have access to it. Here you see a book called on Baul Fakiri songs. These are oral traditions, and they said, we don't have the songs documented. So we sat with the Baul Gurus and documented 700 songs. This is again some 15 years back. And we gave a copy of this book to every Baul Guru. Last year, when there was pandemic and the world stopped, we were in the deserts of the Rajasthan, and we did workshops with the Gurus of Langa and Mangani music. And these are very famous musicians who travel the whole world. And they're always very busy. But because of the pandemic, they work together. And they said that actually just 24 years since we last met. They were in different villages in the deserts of Rajasthan. It was 24 years, they said, when these gurus had met and they were discussing about their art form. So, you might be thinking that when I am saying that get them together and make them talk about their art form, you are saying that why won't that happen? This is why it doesn't happen, because the masters, they're much revered, much respected, they're very busy. And so you create opportunities for them to come together. And they actually came out with a publication on Langa and Manganiyar singing, on what all needs to be covered in skill transmission. So documentation, the benefit has to go to the community, and then you won't have the challenges you were mentioning about, how will the community have access. So we gave each of these recordings to each of the musicians. There are 1,500 who were covered in this inventorying exercise, and all of them got copies. Now, when we're talking of skill transmission, the other aspect is, as I was saying, that sometimes you need to improve on the process. I gave you the example of Dokra. This is another example where, they make mats with natural fiber. And there are hundreds of mat making traditions in South Asia with grass and reeds which grow, not only South Asia, in Asia Pacific. The mat making using natural grass, using natural fiber is a very important tradition. And communities often use locally available colors which are not really eco-friendly or even skin friendly. So those they cannot really sell in the international market because those have chemicals. So what we train them is on using azo-free colors, in using natural colors, so that the mats they make, they can reach to the global market and open up new income opportunities. So this is an important safeguarding action. The third component, I've spoken of skill transmission, I've spoken of reputation. Now this is the other component, innovation. In your safeguarding strategy, when you're talking to the communities, understand what possibilities they're dreaming And then you can, as an NGO, as an academic, as a researcher, bring in skills and knowledge to support new innovations. So here we are now talking of taking the heritage to the market. And of course, all the heritage traditions need not go to the market, but if it goes, the commercialization should be heritage sensitive. It should not destroy the heritage, right? So we need to understand the relationship between the heritage and products. So what are the fruits? What skills are needed? And how that can be taken to the market, how awareness can be developed. And there, you know, we need to build skills for business. We need to build skills for segmenting the market, market segmentation, understanding the price points, ability to costing, which are often not there, ability to claim a price for the performance, ability to negotiate what kind of stage or amenities are needed for the performance to be proper. Like the Chow dancers, they said, you know, often they give stages which are not safe for us and we get injured. You know, even that aspect becomes important. And of course, developing new products. So that's the also very much aligned with the skill development programs we do along with safeguarding. So we have these grasses, and the people used to make ropes traditionally, and it was invisible, that no one knew about this. It was low value, they hardly had income. But now with the same grass, they're making all these beautiful products, bags and mats and so on and so forth, which are contemporary high value products. So here, in safeguarding action, all of us who are working with the communities, we know that sustainable development through ICH is extremely important. And for that, communities need to become aware of the market. They need to know who is buying the product, what the consumer wants. And often when you start working with the community, you find that they make, and there are intermediaries who come and take away the product. And the communities do not even know where the product is going. For example, I went to Kutch, and they make these beautiful cowbells, which are exported to Europe. So I asked, where are they sent to Europe? And he said, you know, the person who says, I asked him once, and he said, think that I throw them in the Indian Ocean. Why do you need to know where I take it? So, you know, that is the kind of thing from where we need to bring out our communities. We need to link them directly to their consumers so that, you know, they get the respect, they get the recognition. Later, we did research and found, you know, the Swiss cowbells, which are so famous, are being made at Kutch and being exported from Kutch. And the makers at Kutch are not getting any recognition, any cognizance for it, right? So these are the kind of things, pitfalls we need to avoid, and we need to directly link. Another extremely important in today's globalized world is to open up ways and opportunities for communities to interact, to exchange, and to collaborate. Because what we find that, you know, just as we, when we research, when we do our research, when we do our degrees, we do our dissertations, we go to conferences, we go to symposiums, we present papers, we listen to other papers. Similarly to the communities, when they interact with each other, see each other, they learn from each other, and they make new innovations. So here are some photos where, you know, we have the Australian indigenous community dancing with the Chow dancers of Purulia. We have Swiss musicians with their traditional instruments playing with Indian musicians. We have Maldives mat makers working with mat makers from Eastern India. So, you know, these are the ways, you know, where they also build their own networks. And what happens, we do a festival called Sur Jahan, which we have been for last 10 years. And festival is an extremely powerful tool. And festival should never be for only the sake of festival, but should be really done as a way of safeguarding. What happens in this festival? We invite festival directors from different parts of the world. And as a result, what has happened? They come and they learn about ICH, which we are showcasing in the festival, and they invite them to their traditional festival. So before the pandemic, till 2019, I think between the last 5 years, if you think from 2011 to 19, I think 300 tradition bearers from the villages. They went abroad and attended various festivals. Thanks to use of festivals, and what happens, to quote a Baul, Ghulam Fakir, who is very famous now. And when we started work, he had no income from his songs, and he used to earn living by, taking dead bodies to the morgue. That was his situation. And he said that, that time, no one even allowed our children to go to school. And today people call me and invite me to have tea in their house. So, they, as they go out to the world, as they gain recognition and respect, they also, their stronghold in the community increases. As a strategy, we do village festivals, and now there are around 15 villages in Bengal which have village festivals. First time we do a festival in a village, it's not only the national and international visitors, but people from the locality. They come for the first time in the village, and we often say, we never knew that this village makes these kinds of products, because that's again, the challenge of you don't know what you don't know. If you think of the domains of knowledge, there are certain things we know, there are certain things we don't know, and there are certain things we don't even know that we don't know. So, that is a huge, wide domain which we need to address. So the Patachitra village, they have a festival every year now, and maximum sale is from people coming from neighboring areas. So you create respect and recognition. And so reputation festival is a powerful tool for empowerment, for exchange, for exposure, and for building reputation. Then it is also important because it helps others in the community to earn, because someone is providing the hospitality service, someone is providing the transportation service. And what has happened in these villages, where no one ever went before, people are now going. And there is tourism, there's cultural tourism, and people are even building resorts and guest houses because they are observing that people are coming to these regions. So it becomes a very powerful tool of sustainable development. So
may I kindly, very kindly ask you to start to, so that we leave more time for
yes, I'm ending.
Because the presentation, the topic and the presentation are amazing. And
yeah.
we would like to leave some.
I'll end in another 2-3 minutes.
Yes, thank you.
So again, going through the quadrants, we have skill transmission, reputation, innovation, and now the final thing is the empowerment part of it. Does the community have control over ICH? The questions you raised before. It's not only about access. They need to have the say on what is being consumed, how it is being consumed, and who is consuming. And that way, ICH becomes the cultural asset, the cultural capital, which results in sustainable development. Another powerful tool is having eco-museums, community museums, living museums, creating places of practice and promotion. You were talking about national inventory and access. So these museums will give the local access, and through technology you can connect. So create these spaces so that people have the access. I've spoken about this documentation. We have mobile apps, we have online websites. And I've also spoke about this. Moment you are empowering the communities to have control, there is a whole range of skills which need to be addressed so that they understand the supply chain, they understand digital storytelling, they can understand the market segments and practices. And there are various government schemes and programs which they can avail of. Packaging itself, as you see here, packaging itself is a storytelling reputation building tool, which can tell people about, the product. So whether the communities are empowered to do all that, it's very important. And if we do that, then ICH and sustainable development, which has been covered in detail in other presentations, that becomes a reality. And from poverty alleviation to augmentation of decent work opportunities, to women empowerment, to building partnerships, to developing habitats such as SDG 11, there are so many SDGs which are directly impacted, and indirectly, I think each and every SDG is impacted. In all these villages, when we started, There was hardly any sanitation in the village. 90% people didn't have a toilet at home. And today in all the villages, they have modern Western toilets, they're clean, they're hygienic. So they learn to appreciate the value of other developmental charters. So this is the model. The model is culture is skills. And these skills can lead to shared enterprise, leading to economic development. By safeguarding ICH, we strengthen the identity, recognition, and pride, leading to social inclusion, and community in that takes greater ownership on their head as the young people come forward, and as a result, the safeguarding process is strengthened, the SDG goals are achieved, and cultural tourism is another important byproduct. So I'll not cover the IP part so much, we can discuss, but these are some of the examples. A film which was made about a girl, Maushumi, who was the first girl Chow dancer, and the film never attributed her. She performed, she was paid, but her name was not mentioned. You know, there are other misrepresentations where, you know, like the Varanasi sari, or the use of symbols of indigenous people, or use of images which communities revere in contexts which are not respectful. So these are the various pitfalls, you know, of commercialization. So there comes the important aspect, which I'm not going to cover today, but I'm just opening up the agenda that when we're talking of empowerment, we spoke about heritage sensitive commercialization and intellectual property tools. This is a huge untapped area where we need to work a lot, but legal and ethical strategies are needed to protect and promote. And often it is very difficult to go to the court and get your right, but we can use the right, we can use the IP tools, make the communities aware of it. So this is a very important safeguarding action. And we need to make them aware that it has to be done at individual level and at collective level, because there's no competition between two practitioners. They need to work together to build their reputation. So again, when you coming back to inventorying, this is another aspect which we need to have in our list of questions, that how does the community like to share? Do they want to protect anything? Do they want to keep anything secret? Then they can be protected by law, right? Is there a community organization who can use tools like collective trademarks? Or is there possibility? Are communities using any IP rights? Are they aware of any labels like the craft mark, mountain products and all that? Are they getting benefits of geographical indications? So when we are mapping, these are also, you know, aspects which we need to cover. So for example, last slide, this one, this is the Bengal Patachitra. They have got geographical indications. So Government of India has given this logo to all communities who have GI. And then they have their own organization called Chitra Taru, meaning a tree of paintings, which have their own logo showing their fish story. So this is their logo. So in all their levels, they're using these two. And you know, previously they did not sign their names. Now they are signing. So this is that famous COVID Patachitra by Shanu Chitrakar. So these are, there can be multiple IP rights which they can use, and as a safeguarding action, our role is to make them aware and give them the support to use these rights. So with that, I end. So you see, safeguarding is a huge task.
Thank you very much, Ananya, for this wonderful presentation. And I would like to stress this point because it also it would also help the participants in their assignment. You started with us inventorying and documenting process, and you moved throughout the process even into business development, etc., ethical issues. And also in this way, I'm saying that for the participants mainly to make the links between the presentations, to make the link between, for example, this presentation of Ananya with yesterday's presentation of Harriet, with yesterday's presentation of Helga, because a lot of that has to do with women. So we see that it's not only the theoretical questions that we were asking Helga, this difficult discussion we had yesterday, but in practice, how to mobilize and encourage women to proceed with their own practices, and but also with the forum, the International Forum on Intangible Cultural Heritage. So I would kindly and firmly ask the participants to make the links between the different presentations. One question: if a particular intangible cultural heritage is practiced at different geographical locations, then how can we do the inventorying? Should we go to every geographical location, or can we do this inventorying at any one of the location? This is a practical question.
We are in a world limited by constraints of resource, right? So we always have in our kitty X amount of money. And as you see in the inventorying, it's a long process of mobilization, trust building, documentation, and all. So ideally, the answer would have been, yeah, go to every location and document. But practically, it may not be possible. But for example, in case of Patachitra, we have at least 3 traditions. And so far, in our 15 years of work, we have been able to document 2, and we are yet to reach the 3rd. It's very difficult to do everything. But we had a great person, in India called Swami Vivekananda, and he said that if you want to achieve the perfect conditions before you start work, you will never work. So that is the premise, you have to start, and then you do and build on your work.
And this also allows me to say that, to make the link to what you just said about the organization that is responsible, the organization could also help us doing the deal with these practical issues, whether we go to 5 stations or we go to 1, etc. Another question that was raised just before, in relation to the variances, to the various kinds of information needed in inventorying. What are your thoughts about national inventories that utilize templates, instruments, which sometimes could be seen as unavoidable for some form of standardization?
Yes,
so
this I have already answered in the previous discussion session we had, that we need to have a template, but the template has to be flexible based on the art form, and for that preliminary research, secondary research is extremely important, that so that when we devise any templates, we do with some knowledge, and then we don't finalize the template before we meet the community. We meet the community, and it has to be also very evolving. But of course, because of constraints, like again, the inventory has to be online and the specification has to be given. If you think of the state, they are there doing a kind of thing. So there will be some pockets. So pockets I have defined that you have to have heritage attributes, you have to have the meaning, the value, the history, the philosophy, and not only, so I've listed the various attributes you need to capture. But even UNESCO in its operational directives have not given a structure, because we are 7 billion people, right, in the world today almost, and we have so many ICAs. There cannot be a one size that fits all. It has to evolve.
Thank you for further clarifying this issue. Gunjan, please unmute yourself and raise the question.
Hi, good morning, ma'am. Firstly, banglanatak is doing a beautiful job, and I'd always heard of banglanatak, but now with these presentations, the details are coming forward and they're really exceptional. My question is with regard to one of the principles that you shared of safeguarding, which is basically to respect the secrecy and the privacy of the ICH of the communities. And in relation to that, my question is about documenting and inventorying. So as you also mentioned the Guru Shishya Parampara, and you mentioned Chow, and I'm also a Chow practitioner. I do Saraikela Chow. So I understand that there are certain trade secrets, and these gurus will only share them with the students over a period of years. So when it comes to documenting as an external person, we are the illiterate people actually when we go out to these communities. So what are the kind of challenges, or what do you have to share regarding say the bowls also, because they also have, it's a devotional tradition. So these are gurus who will only pass down say certain songs or certain rituals only to their specific students, and as externals documenting or inventorying these traditions, we won't have access to that information. So what should be done, and what is
a matter of consent? If they don't want to document it externally, we don't. We respect their need, to transmit it. the way.
Wonderful answer. Wonderful answer. A very right one. Thank you. Mona Lisa. Sorry.
Can I just add on one?
Yes.
So, as an example, so I've done my research in Varanasi, and I documented young vocalists, classical music vocalists. So I know that there are certain rags or musical traditions that have been passed down to them from their gurus who've been taking it from, I don't know, many generations. I know as a person who understands it sensitively that there are traditions, but when it comes to documenting, then I know that I'm missing out on certain information. So I understand consent, I understand trust building, but in terms of inventorying, should we just let it be, like you said? Like,
no, what we have found in reality is that, as I said, that you train the young people in the community. And what we have found that, for the external documentation, they might have this consent issue, but on their own, they document, and that is their property. So we don't have access as external entities.
Very right.
Thank you so much.
So the main thing is, as I said, the 4 quadrants, empowerment. So if you empower them, they have their own ways to carry it forward. And that is all we want, right?
Thank you. That's beautifully put. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mona Lisa, please unmute.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ananya, for your presentation. It's always so nice to listen to you. I joined a bit late. I have this question regarding the inventory making of how is it with this national inventory making system in India and your, like, are they recognized, the thing that banglanatak is doing, the inventory is recognized by the Indian government? Like the thing that you do, like will that could be used by the government to nominate the element into the list, like how that works? Yeah. That is the question.
I am not in the government, but what I can see is India just 4 months back, India has launched its mission of, national cultural skills mapping mission. And I'm very much in touch with the head of that mission. And I'm also part of ICOMOS India. And as part of ICOMOS initiatives, we are also trying to map all inventories which are present. It is impossible. India is many countries, right? So many communities and many countries, you can say. So it is impossible to have one inventory having everything. And even in UNESCO convention, it does not talk about having one national inventory. It recognizes that there might be multiple inventories, but what is important for nomination is that the application, the ICH for which you are doing the application, has to be there, has to be in an inventory, a nationally recognized inventory.
Yeah, because I have this
a tip that comes from your answer, from this remark, Ananya, is that sometimes before we going and starting inventorying, etc., let us try to find an existing or an old inventory, because this would help us a lot, because sometimes in these processes, we do not start from scratch. Somebody else might have done that in the past.
That's why I was talking of secondary research. It's very important you do your research before you start something.
That's a very important. Mona Lisa, please.
Yeah. For example, in case of Portugal, like there are different organizations, they do like inventory making. For example, the Memoria Media, they had done the fantastic work of inventory making. But now what the Portuguese government did was like they recognize only the state inventory, like they have to be within the state inventory to be nominated. So I wanted to know how these things work, like different countries have different issues and this political thing. So yeah, thank you.
Politics is another thing.
Yeah. There is a question.
Thank you, Ananya.
Most of the intangible cultural heritage are complete along with faith and confidential information that is practiced among the given community, not permitted to disclose it to outsiders. And as we said before, even to some of the insiders as well. How far do you consider that of risk of recording tangible forms, expression of intangible cultural heritage when we are inventorying intangible cultural heritage? I'm not sure I completely absolutely understood.
I think I have explained about the consent part.
Yes.
The risk of recording is, we have to, if you are talking about access, what we tried out, Raj, is, there are 2 ways to do it. If the community has the consent to share, we are, for documentations, digital documentation, we are using the Creative Commons license, where we are using the CC BY NC, you know, where you have to attribute the person, and if you use that recording in any way, you have to attribute, and you have to, it has to be non-commercial. If it is to be commercial, then, you know, that is another kind of license. So Creative Commons is a powerful tool for, you know, recordings, if you're talking of risk of access.
Kamal, do you have?
Ma'am, I would like to make it clear a little bit. Actually,
Yes.
my question is connected with the previous sentence. What is my question is, lot of the ICS that is having confidential information, and or it might be the fake that cannot be shared with the others. Then when we are making inventory of those types of ICS, when we are making record, when we are making documentation, there might be a high risk of possibility of making documentation or making inventorying only a tangible form of expression, or the things that we are just watching, just we are hearing. The very major, very crux point of that particular ICS in the community may not be able to come with our inventory process. So at that time, that inventory that we have developed might not be actually helpful in future to make it continuous. Otherwise,
That's why when we explain the safeguarding action, I told 4 components, right? Skill transmission, innovation, reputation, and empowerment. So in safeguarding, you empower the community so that they continue documentations which they do not share with others, but they're empowered to note what are the heritage elements which they want to keep secret, but they can document and transmit. So you empower them to do that. So that is your empowerment strategy.
Okay. Kamal, is there something urgent? Oh, intangible cultural heritage and tangible cultural heritage are inseparable and can benefit each other, especially in promoting cultural tourism. How do they connect tangible and intangible when documenting and inventorying? Ananya, would you like to address that?
Yeah.
Or may I address that in 20 minutes from now to save some time, because I will refer to that as well. Okay, may I, or would you like to say something on that?
Yeah, again, the orchard and the tree, you know, everything is part of the orchard, and it's not that one is separate from the other. And this is somewhere we need to work a lot, because we have all this built heritage conservation community, which say we do not understand intangible cultural heritage. So we need to bridge these communities. And of course, when I had shared that example where communities are mapping resources and in points of interest. So actually in Purulia, you know, they had this built heritage of Jain temples and Buddhist temples, which no one went before. And people used to actually take away the stones and bricks and use it for household use. But once the pride of the community was developed, and now they have become the custodians. So they're very connected.
Kamal, is there something urgent, or we could get back to the issue that we would like to raise on a different session?
Thank you very much. Actually, my hand is very old. So
okay. Thank you very much.
Very
Yes.
urgent things. And Madam, thank you very much. You said, and
Thank you, everyone.
indigenous peoples and their own tradition. I mean, but the things is for me, I think the ethical and the issues is very important for the indigenous peoples. And also the indigenous people, they have the collective rights, and they have the customary system. So also you raise in the traditional medicinal practices, and I also see noticed your presentation using the traditional colors, and for me there's it is related to the traditional knowledge and skills and their innovation to the genetic resources. So question is how to protect their their own rights and continue their futures practices.
Yeah. Barbie, back to you.
Yes, we do see other questions as well in the chat, but we are running out of time. So what I can do is I have the chat saved and I will send these questions to Ananya, and hopefully we can get back to you and we can have some kind of answers that we can share with the other participants. So thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful presentation. It was lovely having you here, and we hope to get in touch with you once again and have another longer chat this time. For the participants, we are very short of time, so we have just 20 minutes for the break. But I see that there have been people who want to interact with each other. So I do have breakout rooms. I will be creating them, and you can go to one of these breakout rooms and have a chat amongst yourselves. Thank you so much once again, and we'll meet again in 20 minutes for Professor Ioannis's lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Ananya.
everyone, for your interest, and thanks, Barbie and Eunice. Bye.
Yes, before we start, Professor, I would just like to give a short introduction. Dr. Ioannis Poulios is an associate professor at the Center for Heritage Management at Ahmedabad University. You must have interacted with him on previous occasions. He focuses on living heritage, tourism, and business. Professor Ioannis conducted his PhD research in living heritage, tourism, and sustainable development at the University College London, and attended MBA electives in business strategy and management at the London Business School. So those are his core interest areas, and that is also what the topic for his lecture today will be. So thank you so much, and Professor, over to you.
So thank you. So, intangible cultural heritage and sustainable development, tips on how to develop your strategy. A case study of the town of Koroni in Greece. So there are some common stereotypes on sustainable development that we would like to challenge today. This does not mean that these stereotypes are not right. In fact, these stereotypes have helped us proceed so far in many ways and achieve a variety of goals. But I think that it is time to challenge some of these common stereotypes. So a first stereotype is that we start with intangible cultural heritage, safeguarding, etc. And then after we finish this process, at some point we link this process of safeguarding, etc., to what we call sustainable development for the community, or even on a broader way. Is this the only process to go, or possibly we could start from sustainable development and then try to identify the intangible cultural heritage that would fit, that would match, that would serve, better serve these sustainable development goals, and try to incorporate this intangible cultural heritage into sustainable development. A question to start. Another stereotype that we have is that we first, especially when it comes to sustainable development, we start with UNESCO countries, states, etc., and then we proceed to the local community. Is this the only way, or it could be the other way around, that we start, even when it comes to sustainable development, from the local community itself? Another stereotype is that the local community should benefit from its own resources, etc., in order to achieve sustainable development. Is this the best way to move forward, or there is a different way? Another stereotype that we are having is that first we see safeguarding, and sometimes we only see safeguarding, and at a much later stage, or even not at all in the equation, we deal with business development. This should always be, in chronological terms and in methodological terms, the right order. And when it comes to business development, we have primarily tourists in mind, and then the service to the local community. Internationally, sustainable development, the first thing that comes to our mind is tourism. And another stereotype is that sometimes we see sustainable development, although we are aware of the three axes, broad axes, themes, or four, environmental and cultural, social, economic, we tend to leave the economic aspect at the end. And sometimes we leave it even aside. So these are some common stereotypes that we would like to kind of challenge, using as a case study a town in Greece with the name Koroni. Koroni, this is the map of Europe, just to, to bear that in mind. So Greece is in the southern part of Europe, and the capital is Athens. So this is the map of Greece. The capital is here in the middle, and Koroni is on the southern part of Greece, here at the very southwest. Okay, it is here on the edge. And Koroni went through a Byzantine, a medieval phase of history. Then it was occupied by Venetians. Then the Ottomans came, and afterwards Greece became an independent nation, state, so Koroni followed this path. So there are layers from all these key phases of use. And in fact, the people of Koroni are very proud of their castle. So as we see, it is by the sea, and there is a castle there, a Byzantine and Venetian castle. So the first thing that comes to the people of Koroni in mind when we're talking about development, when we're talking about protection, when we're talking about heritage, the first thing that comes to their mind is their castle. They're very proud of that. Okay. When it comes to sustainable development, the first thing that we should have in mind, and when we're talking about local communities, the first thing that we should have in mind is what is the management structure that can help towards this process of sustainable development. Sometimes we tend to take that for granted, or sometimes we tend to confuse two terms, local community and local administration. It should not always be the case that these two entities work together. Or sometimes we are trying to find traditional leaders, etc., in a society, which is the very right way to go, but in some cases, not only in the non-Western world, but also in the Western world, these structures might not have the know-how, not in terms of practicing intangible cultural heritage. They do have the know-how for that, but in terms of managing the process of sustainable development. So sometimes external organizations, sometimes and on a local, national, regional, and even international level, make a lot of effort to mobilize, etc., local communities. But if there is no management structure, then all this mobilization, etc., will end in very short terms. So in this case of the local community of Koroni, the best way is not to go to local administration. The best way is not to go to some associations of local community members. The best way is to go to a specific foundation. Private foundation, social benefit foundation, that we see the identity of the foundation aims at the safeguarding of cultural heritage and the promotion of social and economic development of the broader area of Koroni. So we see that the sustainable development philosophy and the sustainable development themes, cultural and environmental, social and economic, is there in the identity, in the vision of this foundation. And also this identity is reflected in the profile of the owners and the donors of this foundation. It is a couple. The husband is a retired economist, so he has worked a lot professionally in several, as a financial director, as an economic director of several companies, and his wife is a writer. So she's more into social sciences, more into literature, more into culture. So we see that the profile of the owners, of the donors, matches this identity and matches this sustainable development philosophy and themes. And in fact, the category of the actions of this foundation, served by temporary personnel and collaborations they make, are cultural environment, social and economic actions. But the philosophy, because they're not experts in sustainable development, the majority of founders and donors are not experts in sustainable development. So initially, the actions of this foundation were individual ones. Some of them were focusing on cultural elements, some of them were social actions, some of them were economic actions. But through the collaboration with temporary personnel, through the collaboration with other organizations, etc., then they started working on linking these actions together, cultural plus social plus economic. So we see that there is no ideal management structure. The management structure has to adjust to the circumstances in order to understand and embrace the concept of sustainable development. And this was reflected even in the choice of collaborations and with temporary personnel that they were having, that they were developing. At the beginning, they were personnel who were either in the cultural sector or in the social sector or in the economic sector. But over the course of time, they tried to find personnel that could work in interdisciplinary areas. So the first thing that we should do is try to identify the right management structure that would help us towards this sustainable development. And even if we identify the right, in quotation marks, management structure, to see or to help this organization understand and embrace sustainable development. So in terms of organizational structure, in terms of know-how, in terms of philosophy, in terms of personnel, they should have the right resources in order to be able to help the local community proceed in towards sustainable development. So we see, we do not start from UNESCO, we do not start from national organizations, heritage authorities, etc., or we start from local institutions and we try to help them embrace sustainable development. The second thing that needs to be done is to map the established strategy. So we see we do not start from intangible cultural heritage. We're not there yet. We start from the development of this area and we try to understand what is the established model, strategic model of this development. So Koroni, the town of Koroni, is based on a traditional model that the whole country of Greece and many places all around the world had applied for many decades, focusing on the sea and sun, based on the sea and sun. This means that Koroni is a tourist destination and especially a summer tourist destination where visitors, so we see that the traditional model was focusing on tourism and the traditional model was focusing on mass tourism that would go to Greece and to Koroni in order to spend their summer holidays. And especially focusing on the harbor. So we see Koroni, the castle is here. This is, let's say, the harbor and the part of the town by the sea. So this is the infrastructure by the sea, and this is the reality by the sea. So we see that a lot of commercialization goes on, not very traditional elements, the one cafe, the one restaurant next to the other. So this, as we are doing the mapping of the established strategy, we saw that this traditional strategy that Koroni was following for several decades had some consequences. It led to the deterioration of the harbor and its traditional character, commercialization, etc. While at the same time, it had no remarkable effect. This traditional development had no remarkable effect upon the remaining city and its traditional character. So we see the commercialization, it's here. A lot of people would come here in order to walk around for their summer holidays, etc., swimming, etc. But at the same time, as we see, the inner part of the city is left kind of intact. There is still a traditional character. There is a living community. You see the clothes, etc. Many of the houses have a traditional character, etc. The habits and the practices are already there. And the castle remains kind of intact, not really affected by tourism. And you see within the castle, we see this Byzantine church here, and a bigger monastery here, and the monastery again. We see another more modern 1800 church by the sea. These are mostly for the local people. Of course, some visitors might use them, etc., but they're mostly for the local people. I went there with my family this summer, and it was incredible because in one of the major feasts, religious feasts, 15th of August, A lot of people went there, local people. It was a celebration of this church. So the whole community went there in order to have this celebration. And at the same time, there were tourists, etc. But the majority of tourists were mostly Greeks, etc. So the remaining part of the city was left intact. So the first process is to see the established strategy and to see what were the consequences of the established strategy so that we know from where to start. At the beginning, everybody would see this place. Nobody was happy from the local community about this place. So the first thing that would come to their mind is how to change this reality. This reality cannot change because it has been on for several decades. So we should start the new strategy from the reality that remains intact. Otherwise, it will be a waste of resources, and we cannot change the whole tourism industry in Greece that unavoidably affects Koroni. So it would be a waste of resources, and at the same time, we wouldn't make it. What a wonderful beach. Okay, just by down to the church. Then we have to focus on the recent developments. The very recent developments that very close to this town, the biggest, the most luxurious hotels in the Balkans, one of the most luxurious hotels in the Mediterranean has been built. Not even 5-star, beyond 5-star. Cristiano Ronaldo, one of the most famous football players in the world, bought a house within this hotel. Some NBA players from the American Basketball Association, some stars all around the world go there to have their holidays, and they have started buying property, rooms there. We cannot ignore that. It's a huge thing. Of course, this Costa Navarino respects the environment, is a very environmental friendly place, and the owners of this hotel are very much into environmental sustainability, etc. Another recent development is the upgraded airport with increased connections to the whole world. This changes the tourism industry, a new road network. So all this development means that there is more tourism coming into the town, the city, and the broader region. And what is the threat? There is a threat towards further deterioration. This means that this strategic model is out of date because it would cause problems to the town of Koroni and all the traditional practices, etc. So we need to get into a new strategy. Is a local community, is this local foundation ready to move into the new strategy? The answer that we tend to give, of course, because the local community knows its place better than anybody else. This local foundation, these people have been there serving the community for decades. They were born there, they led most of their lives there, they were successful there, they knew the Greek reality, they knew the local reality, they know their place better than anybody. They have excellent connections with everybody there. So the local community, the foundation, knows the place best. Not necessarily. What they did, because although they thought that they knew the place, some other people, allow me to include myself in this group of people, told them, yes, you're sure. They said, we have to fight tourism, mass tourism, head to head. I said, is this possible? To fight a model that has been on for several decades? Are you going to fight against the international tourism industry? No. Okay, let's move to alternative tourism. We will start from the castle. We're proud of the castle. Are we sure that this is the right way to proceed? Why not? I don't know. I'm just asking whether we are sure about that. Because if we focus the whole strategy on the castle, which is very prominent, everybody sees that, everybody is proud of that. If we apply all our resources on the castle, this might not be the right way. I'm not saying it is not. I'm saying it might not be the right way. So we would have focused all our strategy into that. And if this strategy proves unsuccessful, a failure, it's very difficult to come back. So it is too risky. Why don't we start with the mapping of all cultural resources? We have already done that. Okay, you have already done that, but let us see what international researchers, international businessmen, business persons how they would see your local community. Maybe they come up with a different idea. Okay, what do you suggest? Why don't we make an international conference on historical memory and economic development? Huh. Okay, this would also be a means to promote your place and your castle, etc., to a broader community of researchers, etc. That's a good idea. So you have to find a way to convince these people to start from an international conference. So they found the support of the Greek parliament and also the embassies of Italy and France. Why the embassies of Italy and France? Because they were associated to the Venetian. You remember the phases of the history of the place, Venetian phase. So the embassies of Italy and France were interested in this Venetian phase of the history. So they said, okay, they got the support of the embassies of Italy and France, and they organized an international conference on historical memory and economic development. So we invited people from Greece, from Italy, from other parts of the world, in order to have their views on what is this historical memory of Koroni, and which elements of this historical memory can lead to the economic development. So we see how we're starting bridging the two towards sustainable development. This is the first aim. And the second aim was for the local community to understand, to be aware of, and be proud of all the variety of the historical memory, not just the castle. Local communities sometimes, heritage authorities sometimes get blinded in specific elements of heritage, the most prominent, the most obvious, etc. And in fact, several elements, heritage elements came into that in terms of agricultural products, in terms of cultural dances, cultural festivals, etc., a whole variety of that. This opened the way towards the second step. We will craft a business plan for Koroni. Okay, the owner of the place said, okay, I have been the economic director of so many companies. I'm the right person to develop a business plan. So when would you like to have it? I will ask the advice of a couple of colleagues, former employees. It's very ready to have it in 2 or 3 months, even less than that. We said, no. Again, no. Let us take again some others to do the business plan for you. So we did. They asked the advice of international consulting company that had a branch in Greece, and also social enterprise. We referred to social enterprise. Harriet referred to the importance of social enterprise in order to design the project. We have consultants from diverse companies, other companies, who acted as sponsors, and we had postgraduate students of diverse backgrounds from different universities in Greece. So we wanted, they ran the project with the help of the consultants from business companies and with the help from consultants from consulting companies like Hay Group and Better Future. So we focused on postgraduate students. Why postgraduate students and not undergraduate students? Because we needed to have a certain knowledge, not just undergraduate students, postgraduate students. So diverse groups of people, and we wanted young people to craft this business plan, not aged people. And of course, the advisory team of the foundation, who had connection with local community and organizations, also emphasis on heritage and natural environment management, etc. I was part of this advisory team, but part of the contract with the international consulting company is that we do not show them the way. We do not give answers to these students, postgraduate students. We just address their questions and help them get in touch with local community organizations, etc., authorities, heritage authorities. We provide them with data, but we do not tell them, you know, the future of Koroni, the economic development of Koroni should be based on that. No, we do not impose any kind of thoughts, any kind of advice on the students. So we see there is a more specific project on the business plan of Koroni with the help, of course, with the support of the foundation and the local community organizations, but the priority is given to young people, students from diverse backgrounds outside Koroni. It is very difficult for local community members to have a supplementary role in terms of crafting a business plan, etc. It's not easy to make it. It's even more difficult for authorities, economic authorities, heritage authorities, to remain silent and just provide information. This structure allowed for that. The new strategy, the new model for the development. So what this business plan did is that they mapped all cultural resources. Some of them were known to the local people, some of them were not really visible to them. Because as we said, sometimes local communities are blinded or get blinded. So they mapped, these young students, these postgraduate students mapped the whole area based on the strengths, and they had a vision, Koroni to become an authentic place that would offer high quality life to its residents. So we start from the residents who are living there permanently for the local community, and afterwards unique experiences to its visitors, based on the distinctive identity and especially cultural identity of Koroni. So the new model is not just sea, sun, but sea, sun, and culture. And when we say culture, it's the castle. No, it's not the castle. The key objectives is for Koroni is to maintain the authenticity of its natural and cultural heritage with small-scale interventions and soft infrastructures. We cannot have big hotels in Koroni. We cannot have big interventions in Koroni. So the part of Koroni that has been affected by tourism will continue, mass tourism will continue to be affected by mass tourism. The part of Koroni that remains intact, this is how we will proceed. Very little money, very little interventions in terms of structure. Koroni has to benefit from the recent developments of the area, mostly through synergies with this huge hotel. We cannot ignore that. But at the same time, it will start from this distinctive character. So the strategic themes: protection and promotion of cultural and natural heritage. Second, upgrade of quality of life for local community. Development of local economy, tourism development, strategic synergies. We see how these strategic themes go back to the vision: an authentic place, high quality life to the residents, unique experiences. Authentic place means safeguarding of cultural and natural heritage, and then quality of life, you remember, for the local community, and then development of the local community, and then tourism. Tourism comes fourth. And of course, strategic synergies with Costa Navarino, etc. And action areas: urban planning, social services, new infrastructure, renewable energy, cultural activities, communication, marketing. Tourism comes at the end, because this is the priority from this mapping. Then the suggesting actions linking social, cultural, and economic was the focus on Mediterranean diet. Mediterranean diet. Were the local community of Koroni aware of Mediterranean diet? I'm not so sure about that. They were aware of the food, they were aware of the dances, they were aware of traditions, agricultural traditions, but it was very difficult for them to wrap all of them into a single term, which is Mediterranean diet. Because Mediterranean diet, this is a copy from the UNESCO inscription. We will get back to that afterwards. The Mediterranean diet has to do with crops, harvesting, fishing, animal take care, conservation, processing, cooking, and particularly the sharing and consumption of food. So it has this food element. It has to do with family, group, and community identity. It has to do with the social element. It has to do with the values of hospitality, neighborliness, intercultural dialogue, and creativity and way of life. It has to do with way of life. It has to do with craftsmanship and production of traditional recipes, etc. It has to do with food. And it's also affected by McDonald's and Western types of food traditions. Women play an important role in transmitting knowledge of the Mediterranean diet. You remember, it gets back to the discussion of Helga, to the discussion of Ananya. Women play an important role because they farm, they cook, etc. They participate in the dances. Markets also play a key role as for the economic development. The local community was aware of most of these elements outside the market value. They would not really recognize the importance of the women role in these traditions, although they would experience that, they would live with that every day. So all this comes into a concept which is related to the cultural roots, etc. You remember the discussion of Ananya, we have to find the origins, etc. The local community needed some external help to understand that all these elements moving beyond the castle, because there are several castles in Greece and there are several castles all around the world. So the distinctive identity of Koroni and of its development could not be based on the castle. So we leave the castle aside and we take some everyday elements of the community that everybody or several people practice them, but they might be not aware of their importance. We find the roots, and this is the Mediterranean diet. And then they decide to proceed with the inscription of the Mediterranean diet on the UNESCO Intangible Heritage List. In order to get a branding for the development, for the heritage recognition, but also for the development, they need not just the national inventory in Greece, they need a broader thing. So why not UNESCO Intangible Heritage List? Does this Mediterranean diet fulfill all the criteria, the social, the cultural, the environmental, the intangible? Of course. The economic, yes. It's under threat. It's under threat by contemporary traditions. So Koroni took the lead in that. The foundation took the lead in that. So we see the foundation that had initiated the process of the business development, at some point, it moved back. Now it's the way, it's the time, the right time to move forward and take the lead. Because which element from the local community would take the lead? The local administration, they could not. Local community associations, they could not. So nobody could have taken the lead for this important step. So Koroni was the representative community of Greece. And since we're referring to Mediterranean diet, it's not only about Greece. It's about the whole Mediterranean countries, Spain, Italy, Morocco. They developed links. They had already links with Spain and Italy. Do you remember the international conference? Do you remember? So the links were already there for Spain and Italy. But they did not want that to be just Eurocentric, because Mediterranean Sea is not only about Europe. They wanted to have, so in fact, the links with communities from Spain and Italy was already there through their connections built through the international conference. They developed the links with Morocco in order to make it more Mediterranean, embracing the part of the countries from Africa. Just to go back to the, sorry, just to be sure about that. So we don't have Greece, Italy, Spain, Morocco is here. Okay, so the Mediterranean embraces all countries. They had already the links with Italy and Spain, and they developed the links with Morocco. Yeah, I had this here also. And then after they, UNESCO, Intangible Heritage, etc., they managed to get they had the signing of joint declaration of actions by 4 communities. And they had a conference on Mediterranean diet as intangible cultural heritage, community awareness activities. So they go back to the community from a different perspective, because now they have this global brand recognition by UNESCO. And they sign this declaration of actions by 4 communities, and they have a conference in Koroni, and all representatives are coming to Koroni. So the local community associations start realizing what their actual treasure is, this intangible heritage. They see other community members, other researchers, they have dances, they have food there. It's a big festival, it's a big celebration, so that the local community starts getting aware of what the Mediterranean diet is and how all these elements that they were practicing in their everyday life are linked to this Mediterranean diet. The next steps was to enhance the collaboration among the 4 communities, to have synergies with local communities taking advantage of UNESCO brand. So the people who are producing olive oil, I forgot to mention, the core of this tradition, the core of this food, the core of these agricultural processes is the olive oil for the whole Mediterranean, which is considered to be very healthy all around the world. And there are several products like soaps, like perfumes, etc., based on olive oil. The famous Greek salad, if you're aware, is based on olive oil, etc. So synergies with local communities. Wine is part of this tradition. So we see how many elements of the economy, of the local economy, olive oil, cheese, vegetables, wine, are important for this economic development, and then extend the UNESCO inscription through the addition of further countries. If they were about to have all countries from the very beginning, they would never get the inscription. So they started from the countries they already knew, Italy and Spain. They embraced Morocco, and then it was they embraced more countries, and they achieved to inscribe also Cyprus, Croatia, and Portugal in this Mediterranean diet. So this was achieved. Allow me to make a review of this strategy. So far, I talked to you about the positive side. Allow me to review it, focusing also on some mistakes that were made in order to help. I could just stop the presentation here and say, wow, what a wonderful example, etc. No, from the benefit of everybody, but in order also to be fair, I would like to draw some attention to some weak points of that. I don't know whether they were mistakes or weak points. Let's say weak points. The extension of the inscription was achieved. Why? Because the capacities in terms of administration were already set. This foundation, with the collaborations with the Greek authorities and the international authorities, could have the capacity to proceed towards the inscription. They had the capacity for that. But what about the post-inscription phase? What about community awareness? What about synergies with local companies taking advantage of the UNESCO brand? My feeling is that community, even until today, has not fully embraced the concept of Mediterranean diet. They are aware and continue to practice the individual elements, but they have not fully embraced the concept of a Mediterranean diet. There is no restaurant saying we offer Mediterranean diet because it was inscribed on UNESCO Intangible Heritage List. There are a couple of wonderful restaurants in the area, but why don't you take advantage? Why don't they take advantage of this brand, UNESCO brand? Communities, winemakers, etc. Why don't they take advantage of that? Olive oil producers, have they fully taken advantage of that? Some of them are successful, but have they fully taken advantage of that? I'm not so sure about that. Why? Because the capacities, as we referred to and we analyzed, in order to start the process and get the inscription, are different or can be different. For me, they're certainly different from the capacities that we need in terms of management for an organization in order to proceed towards the sustainable development, towards branding, towards marketing, etc. we need either a different organization. In my opinion, we need a different organization so that they proceed into that. Sometimes we tend to make the mistake, the organization that starts the whole process should end the whole process, should complete the whole process. When it comes to heritage protection, yes, they can make it. When it comes to sustainable development, they need a different, either a different organization or different synergies, different management structure, different know-how, different mentality, different personnel. Another element is that this foundation had one permanent personnel, and it was developing temporary collaborations with personnel. It was hiring temporary personnel. When it comes to heritage protection, you can do that. They could do the inventorying, they could do all these processes that Ananya went through, the recording, etc., audio, film record, video recorded. They did publications. Of course, you can do that in some cases through a temporary personnel, through temporary collaborations. But when it comes to sustainable development, you should establish either permanent collaborations or, in my opinion, you should establish a different organization that, of course, collaborates with the mother organization. But since the mentality towards sustainable development is different from the mentality of heritage protection, etc., because you need strategy, business strategy, you need marketing, you need hiring the right people, etc., you need branding, you need packaging. You cannot do that on your own. You need a different organization, and then you need to create links with these different organizations. So you benefit from the mother organization and the know-how, etc., but you have a separate organization that would build its separate philosophy, personnel, know-how, etc., in order to proceed through this economic development, etc. I think that what was done there, that was missing there. And another element that was missing is this evaluation of the new strategy. I put that in brackets because I think it was never officially done. And this is another key message to take. Sometimes we focus on achieving a goal. We achieved the inscription, we are happy for that, we are proud of that. No, we have to go back in an official, structured way. We focus on inventorying, etc., putting all these mechanisms for inventorying. Do we evaluate that? We achieve the inventory, we achieve the international inscription, brand inscription. What about the evaluation? If this evaluation is being done, I think some of these elements that I'm pointing out could be addressed, and I think that they could come up with some ways in order to continue towards sustainable development, as I suggested, through a different company. So the conclusions, in order to allow time for discussion, the conclusions of this presentation is that getting back to these stereotypes that I said, they're right, but possibly it's time to challenge them. Better, in some cases, do not start with intangible cultural heritage. In some cases, do not even start from heritage. In some cases, do not even start with what communities or community organizations think about their heritage, especially when it comes to sustainable development. If it is only about heritage protection, of course, you can start with them. But if your vision is to achieve sustainable development, do not necessarily start from that. Start from sustainable development itself, and then incorporate heritage elements or intangible cultural heritage or which element of sustainable development into which element of heritage into this sustainable development, but start from sustainable development. Because in many cases, what communities consider the most important element might not be necessarily the element that will help them achieve sustainable development, at least in the long term. Short term, fine, but medium and long term, no. As we said about the castle, not the castle. Do not start from, we focus on UNESCO, countries, states, etc., national inventories, etc., but focus on local communities. And when you focus on local communities, do not see local community in the restricted sense, community members and associations. See that in a broader way and start to find collaboration synergies that would help the local community further understand without imposing ideas. You saw how this process developed. The external through an international conference, through a consulting company and young people, etc., in order to support the local community. And in these cases, if you have sustainable development in mind, do not start with heritage authorities. Start with other elements of economy, other elements of society that would help the local community, that would help you realize how to move onwards. Do not focus only on safeguarding, because if your vision is safeguarding, one of the problems of UNESCO practices and concept of sustainable development, you remember in yesterday's presentation, there was a question about that. What does UNESCO do about marketing? And the answer was, they don't have marketing into mind. Why? Because they make a mistake. They start the sustainable development discussion from heritage, from protection. The philosophy of heritage, the mechanisms of heritage protections might be different, to my opinion, in most of the cases are different from those of sustainable development, at least in the economic part of that. The social and the cultural, okay, they have it. But in terms of the economic part, so we have all these international organizations. Sometimes we have these national organizations starting with identifying, monitoring, safeguarding, listing, intangible heritage, etc. And at some point, building community awareness. And when they come to the step of marketing, to the step of branding, they cannot do that. Because the philosophy is not there. Because the philosophy from the very first time, from the very beginning, was not there. So how are you going to achieve it? It's impossible. I'm giving the answer. Yesterday, the answer was UNESCO does not really deal with that, with marketing, etc. My answer here now is UNESCO cannot deal with marketing, etc. Because the philosophy is not there, the mentality is not there, the know-how is not there. They have never done that in the past, and the personnel is not there. How can they achieve it? And it was not there from the very beginning. National heritage authorities, why can't they do that? Because of the same reasons. Economic development, which is an important part of sustainable development, cannot be achieved. And remember that we tend to say sustainable development has the social, the environmental, cultural, and the economic part. Sustainable development cannot be achieved in long term unless there is an economic benefit. If there is no economic benefit, all these traditions that we have been discussing and analyzing, all this throughout the course and beyond the course, will fade out, will disappear. So it has to be economic benefit in a sustainable way. And we have to build the right management structures, the right strategies in order to achieve this long-term sustainable economic development. Otherwise, we waste resources and we'll get back to having inventories of traditions that are dying out, fading out, or disappearing. If you don't get the young people into that, how to do that? Sustainable development in its economic terms is not a trend, it's an urgency. It's not only about rhetoric, it's about actions. An inscription is not the end process, is not the end result. An inscription, any kind of inscription, is a means, is a step of the whole process. To me, it is just the beginning when it comes to economic development, just the beginning. Sustainable development is not something abstract, but it's based on strategy, vision, methodology, synergies. So you need to create all these in terms of management, in terms of strategy, etc., methodology in order to achieve that. And also put emphasis on the evaluation. No matter how well you do something, no matter how well you think you do something, no matter how many international recognitions or national recognitions you achieve, always have evaluation, because evaluation is what is the key towards the new strategy, is the key towards the new phase. Thank you very much. Questions and remarks? Let me stop sharing the presentation. Yeah. So the first question, Barbie, help me if I miss a question. If state party is not involved, is there any platform through which local communities can reach out to cross-border networks? The idea of organizing conferences is, of course, one way. Of course, there are ways. We should not depend on national heritage authorities when it comes to sustainable development, especially in the economic development. You have the farmers, you have the wine producers, you have the olive oil producers, you have the cheese producers, you have all elements in order to proceed. My question is, could they achieve international development even without the UNESCO brand? Yes. Because the answer is, did they achieve economic development through the UNESCO brand? As we said, not really. So the UNESCO brand is a step, is a means, but it's not the end result. It's not even an unavoidably and absolutely necessary step in the whole process. If we see heritage protection, if we have heritage protection in mind, of course, the UNESCO Intangible Heritage inscription is the peak. If we have sustainable development, especially in economic terms in mind, UNESCO inscription might not be the peak. It is one of the steps that can help towards broader recognition. Is it the only step? No. Is it the most effective step? No. Can we have it without UNESCO inscription? Certainly yes. It's how the management structure and the strategy focuses on that. Do you get the point? There are producers in Greece that have a conference is one way, a conference is on one way. All these local enterprise companies is another way, even stronger than the conference. The connections between the Greek, the locals that live in Koroni, there is a huge community of people from Koroni in US. Why don't you take benefit from that? If you ask me, taking benefit from your relatives in US, where there is an open market, where olive oil is skyrocketing in terms of market, in terms of sales, etc., and recognition, is this more important than UNESCO? Certainly yes. UNESCO inscription? Certainly yes, is my answer. Olive oil is becoming very famous in places like China and Japan. Is there a way that the people from the farmers of Koroni establish associations, farmers associations, in order to get through the local businessmen to get into these markets? That's a more effective way than having an UNESCO or any kind of inscription. I'm not against, of course, UNESCO inscription. You know, I helped into that, as you see, but it's not the only way. It is one of the ways. Even if the state party is not involved, no issue. No issue. Sustainable development can be achieved in various ways. Allow me to say, and I don't want to promote any kind of university or any kind of association, banglanatak, we don't need to promote it. You know, we're aware of the work, of the incredible work that they have been doing. We are trying to put emphasis on our university, how craft organizations can develop strategy, business strategy, marketing, management in order to achieve sustainable development, economic development, not necessarily through national or international platforms. I mean, heritage platforms. They could help. In many cases, they could not help. We have so many craft organizations in Asian countries and South Asian countries dealing with jewelry, dealing with, and not organizations, family-based businesses, dealing with crafts, dealing with jewelry, with carpets, with wood, with clothes, with design. In order to achieve sustainable economic development of all these companies, family-based companies, should we find a way to go through national heritage inventories and UNESCO heritage lists? No way, no way. So how to build business strategy, management, and marketing in order to achieve this? This is the question. How a local community, how we as practitioners, we as family company members, we as young people that inherit something from our parents, how can we achieve economic sustainable development? This is the question. If heritage authorities can help, fine. If they cannot help, it's fine. But we do not get blinded into this process. So heritage protection, inventorying, etc., is a vehicle, a step, an important step towards sustainable economic development, as we saw in this presentation. So we do not depend on anybody. We depend on our own resources. And the second question, allow me here, is do we have the resources to do? You saw. They absolutely have the resources. Every local community has or can have the resources to do that, as long as they have the right management strategy and marketing procedures. Every local community can have the resources. Every company can have the resources to do that, even if any family business company. Other question. Please unmute yourselves and
I have a quick question. I was just writing.
Of course.
Okay, maybe towards the extreme end of the cultural tourism, places like Venice, you know, before the pandemic, you know, the small town has been always overly crowded with the tourists all the time. So I guess I can imagine how it has been affected the residents and their lifestyle. So like it's so strategic management or sustainable management tool can also apply to kind of, you know, ease the congestion of a tourist as well, no?
We do not start from changing the tourism industry. Think about Venice. You mentioned about Venice. All the last decades, the emphasis was how to fight head-to-head against mass tourism. There is an oxymoron here. We have all these heritage authorities. We all know that UNESCO brands, especially in the World Heritage Convention, help tourism. Okay, there are researches into that, but we know even into practice. So we have this heritage management system governed, state-oriented, trying to focus on tourism development. We have all these international organizations, allow me not to mention them, they can be all of them, that focus on tourism development. Initially in Europe, after World War II, then in Asia, you know, all-inclusive, etc. Now in Africa. Okay, so it's the same route. And then we have all national governments focusing on tourism. And then we complain about mass tourism of Venice. It's an oxymoron. Okay, this is where we stand. Okay, stop criticizing the past. We focus on today's situation. So the emphasis all these decades was how to fight head-to-head against mass tourism in Venice, in Rome, in Dubrovnik, in Athens, in Istanbul. Has this been successful or not? No. There was always the threat of removing Venice from the World Heritage List. I'm not going into politics, but what else do you need in terms of mass tourism development in order to not to remove it? What else can be done? How many tourists? And even this year, there was an agreement of the local municipality to ban the ships from, come on. Are we serious of what we're talking or not? And this is real. I'm not moving against Italy or UNESCO. This is real because one way or another, this is the reality. We cannot fight mass tourism. We have to find other alternatives in order to achieve other, not cultural tourism, other means, other ways of development. The reply to mass tourism is not necessarily cultural tourism. The reply to mass tourism is to go through these management strategic processes, taking advantage of the strengths of each place in order to achieve other means of sustainable economic development. It has to be economic because you cannot fight mass tourism with social groups. No, there should be an economic benefit for that. There should be an economic benefit for the young people not to get into the mass tourism industry. And there should be some significant economic benefit to that. So even in cases like Venice that are lost, okay, because of all these decades, but don't take Venice. Why don't we take all these places in South Asian countries which do not have the tourism of Venice? We have to go through this process, but to have the right tools to go through this process in order to have alternative economic development. What kind of alternative development? We might not know that. We might need somebody else to help us identify that. I think this is one of the key messages of today's presentation. So don't fight mass tourism, no way. Don't try to focus on cultural tourism against mass tourism, no way. Don't try to have even development based on your own ideas, etc. Not personally, you know, I'm talking general. Try to set the right practices in order to get to that. Yes? Clear? I see you worried. That's a good sign. This means that you have already starting developing the new thing. Thanks. I'm very happy for that. Can the Center for Heritage Management Ahmedabad help to form a cross-border network of a particular local community, e.g. Santhal, Garo, Hajon, etc.? The answer is it's a very good idea. Yes, we can help towards that. Professor Neil would be the most appropriate person to do that, but I would certainly help into that. It's a very good idea, and I think we should try to focus on building a network into this direction that we are speaking, because I think that this direction, this philosophy is, we don't have this philosophy. That's why I focused to do the presentation on that. To tell the truth, my initial presentation would be about UNESCO policies from the business strategy perspective. But then we had a collaboration with all lecturers, and they said, you know, we have to emphasize the local community aspect. So I changed that into this so that it's more relevant to us. Instead of, you know, talking about UNESCO policies from business strategy point of view, very interesting, yes, but for a different context. We lack these capacities. We need to build the capacities. We need to build the networks in order to achieve that. And we need to take advantage of UNESCO organizations, ITSCAP, etc. We need to take advantage of UNESCO inscriptions, etc., into this mentality that we are discussing. So we have all the pieces here. We need to put them together in order to achieve this sustainable economic development. All the pieces are already here. We just need to set them in the right place. And the Center for Heritage Management of Ahmedabad University would certainly do that. To tell the truth, where we were about to do that from the very beginning, but we said, in order to do the network, we have to start with our own students. So first of all, we have to focus on our teaching, because a university is primarily a teaching and learning institution. So we have to focus on our teaching, to develop some new courses on that. And after that, based on that, to move into this network. This is the right way, because our primary function is learning to provide learning experience, learning know-how. So we will start from this, and we have already started from this, and now we will develop this. So even, you know, this is the way we started. We have already started this process, and we will continue to develop this process. Other question? Please, we have another 15 minutes, plenty of time to address any questions, any remarks. In present, all human beings are suffering from corona pandemic conditions. So how can we make plan to safeguard intangible cultural heritage? My answer is how to make plan not simply to safeguard intangible cultural heritage, but to find sustainable economic development. So what they did this year, the town of Koloni had many tourists. How did they have these tourists? Especially locals, and especially from US. The relatives of US, of the people of Koroni from US, they all came to Koroni, and they spent 1 month there because of this, you know, pandemic effect that they, you know, in order to get after this shock, they spent 1 month in Koroni. We also have some local festivals there for the local people through money from private companies, through money from the Ministry of Culture. There were local festivals going on for the local people. So we see, please stop thinking about safeguarding itself. Please stop thinking about tourism itself and try to find alternative ways in order to make it. And if you find the answer to the sustainable economic development, this you will have already found the answer towards safeguarding intangible heritage. The best means of safeguarding is sustainable economic development. So if we find an answer to sustainable economic development, we have already found the answer to that. Other question. So please change the whole mentality, take it the other way around, and I think this will be very helpful. Other question, other remark. Farming practices cultural practices, all these practices have not been affected severely by pandemic condition. The town of Koroni had zero, very little, very few cases, while many places in Greece were really suffering, and we're still suffering in Greece by the fourth wave of pandemic. So why should pandemic change our sustainable development processes? Pandemic, we had economic crisis, we have pandemic crisis, we will have migration crisis. I don't know whether there is any war coming, I hope not, okay? But so far, why do we focus on pandemic? We have been living throughout crisis, and we will continue to live throughout crisis over time. So why do we care about pandemic? The question is how to develop management strategy and marketing that can adjust to any kind of crisis. And the other question is, why haven't we already developed such strategies? We had the global economic crisis, nobody moved into digital. And then we have the pandemic crisis, and then we blame the pandemic crisis for the fact that we have never moved into digital. We had economic crisis, we never moved into strategies, long-term strategies, sustainable development strategies, economic development strategies, partnerships, etc. And then now we put the blame on the pandemic. Don't put the blame on pandemic. Let's put the blame on us, heritage authorities, heritage professionals, communities, of not having done the right, making the right steps all this time. So the question is how to craft strategy in a turbulent environment. The question is not how to safeguard intangible cultural heritage through the pandemic or in a post-pandemic situation. The question is how to craft strategy in turbulent periods. Strategy not only for safeguarding, but also for economic development in a pandemic, in turbulent situation, no matter what kind of turbulent situation this is. Okay, Diriodan, clear? Duroidan, clear? So forget about pandemic. And the other mistake that we did when the pandemic came, we are waiting for the pandemic to end. Come on. Every doctor in the world would tell you that this would take more than 1 year. Do we have the luxury to wait for 1 year? No. So any kind of crisis does not affect the substance of our strategy. And
do we have any more questions for Professor Ioannis? We have another 8 minutes to complete. Yeah, he is back. So I think one thing that we would like to ask him probably is to how to address the concepts that he explained, especially in our assignment. So
we're back.
Yeah.
Sorry for this technical issue. Yes. So other questions. Sorry, Maria, was it you?
No, Professor, I was just mentioning, if it is possible, can you address the assignment part of the course as well? How the strategy mentioned that you just mentioned could be helpful in the assignment that the participants are supposed to do.
I think that towards the assignment, you should try to focus more on the management structure aspect. What is this organization that will take the lead for that? Think of an organization that is related to the local community, or how to develop partners between this organization and other community members or other local organizations. So think about the management structure process. Who does this inventorying? Okay, who? Which organization does that? And or which type of organization does that? And the other question would be, not think only about inventorying, but think where can this inventorying lead in terms of economic benefit. So try to identify some elements that could lead to products, services, etc. So while you're doing the inventorying, think about some elements, how to proceed towards sustainable economic development. Okay, these would be the two issues that I would like to develop. Is the foundation of Koroni an investor or just a funding agency? It's a funding agency. The
Also, actually, I had a
yeah, the people have already made their money throughout their professional life, so they do not really do that in order to have a payback, if this is the question. And they're now focusing, they're trying to focus on, they're giving scholarships to young students who might not have them, the financial resources to proceed with their studies. They're trying to help with associations, product associations, farming associations, etc. But it's not an investor. But even if it would be an investor, this does not necessarily, is not necessarily a bad thing, because, somebody who tries to put resources, they could have some payback. Why not? It's part of economy. Why should someone invest all this money, etc.? No, we should not be close to this kind. If we set the right philosophy, the right management structure there, we should not be afraid by investors, by local enterprise. As long as we know how to do that, we'll do that in other question.
I had a question from the previous session that I think I was asking about, intangible cultural heritage and intangible, such as monuments, buildings, or could have been like the artist product or a tree that represent the village or things. So in terms of inventory, documenting and inventorying in each area, is there any kind of a connection or link to help each other, to complement each other?
In terms of inventorying, Ananya would better address that. But my answer is, even if we inventor, every intangible heritage element has a tangible part, and every tangible part has an intangible part. So every time we proceed with the inventorying, we should bear into account, since we do the inventorying process, do it as much as we can. Take into account all elements and the links between intangible and tangible elements. Ananya could further develop about that. But my answer, I will take the question for my own presentation, is that when it comes to sustainable development, nobody in the market cares whether an element is tangible or intangible. Nobody. Nobody in the market cares whether Mediterranean concept is an intangible heritage element, but the oil is presumably a tangible heritage element, and the fish that we eat as part of the Mediterranean diet is a tangible element. So if a restaurant opens there in Koroni offering intangible heritage element, well, they have to have some tangible elements so that people can eat. It's not just an abstract concept. So they will eat olive oil, they will eat Greek salad, they will eat fish. So this dichotomy of tangible and intangible does not help us in the heritage protection process, but it certainly does not help us towards achieving economic sustainable development. It helps us with inventorying and documenting some elements of intangible heritage. It helps us there. But as I said, inventorying should be part of the whole process towards sustainable development. So while we're doing the inventorying, even if it is the inventorying of intangible heritage, or even if it's the inventorying for tangible heritage, we should try to draw links between the intangible heritage and tangible heritage and reverse, and link them to the sustainable development. So if you come up, for example, in your exercise, you will go through the inventorying of an intangible element. If you're thinking of sustainable also economic development, you could make the link between this intangible heritage and possibly a tangible heritage element. If, for example, you're inventorying, I don't know, manuscripts or crafts, and these crafts are associated to religious festivals and to a monastery, a local monastery, take that into mind for the sustainable development process. Or possibly, as I said about the management structure, could the monastery help towards this management structure of inventorying, but also moving it beyond that? Do you get my point? So as you're going through the inventorying process, you're inventorying, you're documenting intangible heritage. If this helps, make some links with tangible elements, the monastery, because this might help you towards the sustainable development, or it might help you towards even the management structure. So try to have in mind the whole process as you are doing the inventorying for intangible heritage. Clear? Perfect. Other question, possibly a last question?
I think it has been a very long day, so we
Thank
are
you.
out of questions now.
Okay, back to Barbie. Thank you, Barbie, for all your help.
Thank you so much, Professor Ioannis, for bringing us back to this ground reality of economic sustainable development. We will end today at this. We will meet tomorrow, same time, same place for another lecture. So see you all tomorrow, and thank you so much for being here. Bye-bye.